Why am I sharing this? You know, if I could go back in time to the day I first started thinking about moving into a senior living home, there are so many things I would tell myself. Things that could have saved me a lot of anxiety, insecurity, and honestly, even some illusions. When we start considering this possibility, leaving our home, our belongings, the routine we built over a lifetime, 1,000 mixed emotions come up. And honestly, I didn't see many people talking about it in a real, honest way. What I found were two extremes, either stories painting these places as sad, lonely, almost like the end, or advertisements promising paradise on earth, like a resort, full of instant happiness. Neither of those felt true to me. That's why I decided to record this video. I'm not an expert. I'm not a healthcare professional. I don't own or work at a facility. I'm just someone who went through this experience. And to be honest, things would have been a lot easier if back then someone had just sat down with me and explained simply and truthfully what this process is really like. So if you're going through this, if it's you or someone in your family considering this change, I want to share my story with you. No sugarcoating, but no horror stories either. Just opening my heart and telling you everything I wish I had heard before making this decision. Because yes, there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's doubt. But there are also discoveries, lessons in life. A lot more life than I ever expected. My journey so far. The decision no one wants to make. To truly understand how I got to this point, I need to tell you a bit of my story. And let me tell you, it wasn't an easy decision. In fact, to be honest, it's the kind of decision no one ever wants to make. For a long time, I was that person who said, a nursing home? Never. I'm staying in my house until the very end. And honestly, I truly believed that with all my heart. After all, my home had always been my safe haven, my furniture, my belongings, my memories. Everything there told the story of my life. But life has its own plans, doesn't it? Little by little, signs started to show. Signs I chose to ignore at first. I started falling more often. It got harder to get out of bed, to take a shower, to do simple things. And along with all that came the loneliness, creeping in slowly, almost without me noticing. My kids started to worry more. They tried to help, took turns checking in, but I could see the exhaustion on their faces, the burden. And me, someone who had always been so independent, started to feel like a weight. Not physically, but emotionally, like I was becoming a burden to them. You know what I mean? Admitting that to myself was probably the hardest part, because it's not just a change of address, it's a change of life. It's facing the truth that, yes, we've grown older, that our body doesn't quite keep up with our mind the way it used to, and that sometimes asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. In the middle of all that, my heart was torn. Part of me wanted to resist, to fight, to prove I could still handle everything. But another part, deep down, already knew something had to change. That holding on like that wasn't about safety, it was just stubbornness. And let me tell you, if making the decision was hard, waiting to see what came next was even more challenging. Because with the decision came the fear, a lot of fear, my fears, my doubts before the move. I think one of the heaviest parts of this whole process was, without a doubt, the fear. And there wasn't just one. There were many, coming in waves. Sometimes I felt fine, almost sure of my decision. And then suddenly, that sinking feeling in my stomach would return, that tightness in my chest. The fear of losing my autonomy was probably the biggest of all. The idea of no longer being able to decide what to do when I wanted to do it made me anxious. I've always been very independent. I kept thinking, are they going to start deciding even when I can have a cup of coffee? Then there was this deep fear of losing my space, my story. Because a home isn't just walls and a roof, it's memory, it's life. How do you fit an entire life into one room, one dresser, 2 suitcases? Just thinking about it hurt. And of course, the fear of being treated like I was incapable of being seen as just another old person, of becoming invisible, or worse, being treated like a child. I kept wondering, will they talk to me like I'm a kid? Will they really listen to me? Loneliness also scared me. Strange, right? Because if I'm being honest, I already felt somewhat alone before the move, but it was a different kind of loneliness. At home, I was still surrounded by my things, my corners, my memories. In a senior home, would I still have that? And to top it off, there was that other ghost. All the horror stories we hear about care homes, abuse, neglect, abandonment, stories that scare anyone. And at the same time, I'll admit, I also caught myself romanticizing it, imagining it might be like a hotel, full of activities, friendly people, total freedom. And that illusion brought its own doubts, because deep down, I knew neither extreme was real. The truth is, I felt caught between two fears: the fear of losing my freedom and the fear of not being able to handle living alone anymore. Like I was walking a tightrope of emotions. And in the middle of all that turmoil, the time came to start looking for a place. And let me tell you, that turned out to be a challenge of its own. The search, how do you choose what I didn't know? If you think deciding to move into a senior home is hard, just wait until you start the search. I thought it was just about picking a nice, clean place that fit the budget, and that was it. But let me tell you, it's not that simple. Right from the first visits, I realized there's a lot we don't even know we need to look for. What I first saw as just minor details, like the smell of the place, the way the staff look, or don't look, at you, their tone of voice, even the posture of the residents, actually said much more than any glossy brochure or website full of professional photos. And you know what surprised me the most? The huge difference between homes. Some were cold, almost clinical. Everything's spotless, sure, but with that hospital vibe, you know? Others felt much warmer, full of life, people talking, laughing, moving around. And that's when I started to understand it's not just about the physical space, it's about the atmosphere, the energy, and how that place made me feel. Another thing I didn't know, there are different types of homes. Some are designed for people who need intensive care. Others are for those who still have a lot of independence but want security and companionship. Figuring out where I fit was really tough, because my heart said one thing, my body said another, and my family, well, each person had their own opinion too. During that process, I learned to ask questions I hadn't even thought of in the beginning. What's the daily routine like? Is there a schedule for everything? Can I choose what I want to eat? What if I want to go to bed later? Is there space for privacy? And if I don't want to join the group activities, is that okay? And of course, I started paying a lot more attention to the people working there, because in the end, they're the ones who make all the difference. A place can be beautiful, modern, full of technology, but if the care is mechanical, without warmth, no comfort can make up for that. So if I can give you one piece of advice right now, it's this. Don't fall in love with the facade. Listen to your heart. Pay attention to how you feel, to the looks, to the conversations. The right place isn't perfect, because perfection doesn't exist. But it has to be a place where you feel seen, heard, and respected. And after all that searching came the most challenging part of all, the adjustment. And that taught me a lot about myself. The arrival, the first day you never forget. If I said I slept well the night before, I'd be lying. The anxiety was so intense, it felt like I was about to set off on a trip to a completely unfamiliar place. And, in a way, that's exactly what it was. The drive there was silent. My son was driving. My daughter-in-law sat beside him trying to make small talk. But the truth is, we all had a lump in our throats. No one really knew how to act, what to say. It was like any word might fall short, or worse, make things harder. When we arrived, I was greeted by a very kind caregiver with a warm smile that, I'll admit, calmed me down a little. She called me by name, looked me in the eyes, and that made a huge difference. It may sound simple, right? But in that moment, being treated like a person and not just a new resident was a relief. Walking into the room felt strange. Everything was so clean, organized, but impersonal. Of course, how could it be anything else? It was my first time there. I looked at the empty closet, the neatly made bed, a chair in the corner, and for a few seconds, that cruel thought hit me. Is this where I'm going to spend my days now? The goodbye was hard. When my son and daughter-in-law stood up to leave, I tried to be strong, to hold back the tears, but I couldn't. The truth is, no matter how prepared you think you are, that moment always hurts. It's like reality hits you all at once. The first few hours were a mix of strangeness and observation. I started noticing the other residents, some more lively, some quieter. Some looked at me curiously, others didn't seem to notice I was there. The sound of conversations, the TV in the lounge, footsteps in the hallway, everything was new. The caregiver came back to take me to lunch. In the dining room, I was introduced to a few people. They sat me at a table with two gentlemen who had been there for a while. The conversation was a bit stiff at first, naturally, but slowly it started to flow. They gave me a few tips, simple things like, if you want to rest, just let them know, or the food's good, but sometimes you've got to ask them to go easy on the seasoning. Going back to the room after lunch felt strange again. A part of me wanted to run away, go back home, but another part, deep down, was already beginning to understand that maybe it was just a matter of time, that all beginnings feel weird, and that's when I really began to live the experience, to adjust. And let me tell you, that's when some truly surprising things started to happen. The adjustment, the first few weeks. If the first day was tough, the first few weeks were a true emotional roller coaster. I used to wake up feeling disoriented, taking a few seconds to remember where I was. I'd stare at the ceiling, the closet, the hallway, and that thought would hit me. So this is where I live now. I'll admit, those first days felt endless. The hours dragged on, especially after visitors left. There was that emptiness, that longing for my old routine, the smell of my coffee, the sound of my neighbor sweeping the sidewalk, even the clanking of the front gate. Things I honestly never imagined I'd miss. But little by little, the unfamiliar started to become familiar. The faces of the caregivers became part of my day. I found out who made the strongest coffee, who had the gentlest touch during baths, who liked to chat, and who was more reserved. I even learned to tell who was in a good or bad mood just by how they knocked on the door. I also started noticing the other residents. At first, it seemed like everyone already had their group, their routine, their unspoken rules. I felt like an outsider, like someone arriving at a party where everyone already knows each other. But slowly, small gestures began to appear. A wave in the hallway, a warmer, "Good morning." And then one day, I was invited to sit at the Domino's table. And look, it might sound silly, but that made a huge difference for me. That's when I realized, yes, there was a place for me here. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were tough days. There was that moment when I wanted to pack my bags and leave. There were waves of homesickness. Tears quietly cried into my pillow. There was anger at myself, at the situation, at life, for seeming to push me into a place I never wanted to be. But then, small joys started to show up. I discovered a lady who loved singing boleros, and sometimes in the late afternoon, she'd start singing out in the garden, and whoever wanted to could join in. In those moments, it felt like the whole atmosphere changed. That place, which had once seemed like just a storage space for old people, the way so many outsiders wrongly see it, turned into a place full of life. And it was by recognizing these small shifts, these new routines, that I began to accept. I learned, for example, that I could personalize my room. They brought my photos, my favorite armchair, even that old lamp I swore no one would let me bring. And suddenly, that space actually started to feel like home. I also realized that the adjustment wasn't just mine, it was the staff's, the other residents'. and even my families, who were also adjusting to this new dynamic. And it was through this process that I started to understand life in a care home isn't a pause in life. It's a continuation, different, full of challenges, but also full of possibilities. What's true and what's a myth about life in a nursing home? If there's one thing I've learned living here, it's that there are a lot of myths, both good and bad, about what life in a nursing home is really like. And let me tell you, it's not as terrible as some people say, but it's also not that rosy picture you sometimes see in the brochures. One of the biggest myths, without a doubt, is the idea that anyone who moves into a nursing home has been abandoned. I still hear that to this day, from people who don't even know my story or how I ended up here. And honestly, that hurts. Because the decision, at least in my case, was much more about care, protection, and love than anything else. The truth is, many residents here have families who visit, call, and take care of them. Sure, there are exceptions, unfortunately, but to generalize is just unfair. Another common myth is that we lose all our freedom here. I had that fear too. And yes, there are rules, schedules, and limits, and after all, this is a shared space and it needs a certain level of organization to function. But within that, there are choices. I choose whether I want to join the activities or not, whether I want breakfast in the dining room or in my room, whether I want to spend the afternoon in the garden or reading in my cozy corner. It's not a prison, like a lot of people imagine. And then there's that heavy prejudice that people who live here are just waiting to die. To me, that's one of the biggest lies. Sure, we're all older, many of us have health issues, and yes, the idea of mortality is more present in our conversations. But do you know what else is present? Life. New friendships are forming, people are falling in love. Yes, you read that right. There are group chats, bingo games, movie nights, even gossip, just like anywhere else. Now, I won't lie and say everything is perfect either. There are places that don't offer proper care, that treat people like numbers, that operate on autopilot with no warmth or affection, and that's why choosing the right place makes all the difference. Here's another thing no one talks much about: loneliness. Yes, it still happens sometimes, even when you're surrounded by people. It's not the same kind of loneliness as living alone, but it's real. Sometimes it's not about missing people, it's about missing your people. The ones who know your quirks, your stories, your memories. What I've come to realize is that living in a nursing home is like living in any community. There are good days and bad days, people you connect with, and people you'd rather just greet politely and move on. The biggest myth of all, in my opinion, is thinking that living here means you failed at life. It doesn't. It's just another stage of life. Different, yes, often challenging, but full of possibilities I honestly never imagined until I got here. What changed in me? Reflections I never imagined I'd have. If you had asked me back then who I would become after moving into a nursing home, honestly, I wouldn't have known how to answer. And maybe I would have said I'd be someone sadder, more limited, more, smaller. But let me tell you, life surprised me. The first thing I realized is that I really had to learn how to look at myself. When you live in your own house, with your routine, your habits, your things, you don't even notice how much of yourself is hiding behind all of that. Here, without the backdrop that defined me for so long, I had to rediscover who I am without the walls I built around my life. And you know what? I found out I'm more adaptable than I thought. I've learned to live with differences, to understand rhythms that aren't just my own. People who wake up early, people who talk loud, people who prefer silence, and me, who always thought I liked peace and quiet. I realized that sometimes other people's noise can feel like company too. Another thing that changed a lot was my relationship with time. Before, I lived under the pressure of the clock, the to-do list, the constant, I have to do this, I have to take care of that. Here, time flows differently. At first, it made me anxious. The days felt too long, like I was just waiting, but little by little, I realized I wasn't waiting. I was just living in a different way. With more presence, more pauses, more attention to things I used to overlook. I also surprised myself by realizing how much I still had to learn about others, and especially about myself. I learned to ask for help without guilt, to accept that my body has limits, and that doesn't make me less of a person. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's actually a very beautiful kind of courage. And maybe the biggest transformation was realizing that I still have value, that I still have things to offer, to teach, to share, that my stories matter, that my advice can make a difference, that my laughter and even my silence takes up a space that is uniquely mine. Living here didn't erase who I am. On the contrary, it made me see myself with more truth, more honesty, and even more kindness. And it's funny to realize that in the end, I didn't lose my freedom. I just learned a new way to live it. Advice I'd give to anyone thinking about moving into a nursing home. If I could sit across from someone who's going through that whirlwind of doubt, is it time? Will I be able to adjust? Is this the right thing for me? The first thing I'd say is take a deep breath, slowly, because there's no one-size-fits-all answer. There's no right or wrong choice. There's only the answer that makes sense for you, in your life, at your moment. And if I can offer some advice, it would be this. First, visit the place. And I don't mean a quick visit. Go with time. Sit down, observe, talk to the people who live there, to the staff. Feel the atmosphere. Does it smell like care? Does the environment feel warm and welcoming? Do people's eyes show respect? That, more than any fancy brochure or polished online ad, will tell you whether that space has soul, whether it feels real. Second, don't fool yourself into thinking it will feel like home on day one. It won't. Actually, no big life change ever does. Just like when you get married, move to a new city, or start a new job. It takes time. There's fear, discomfort, even moments when you'll want to give up. And that's okay. It's part of the process. Third, bring your story with you. Bring your photos, your most loved objects, that old blanket that smells like good memories. It might seem silly, but it matters. It helps the new place feel a little more like you, with your colors, your scent, your past. Fourth, don't shut yourself off. It's tempting to isolate, to stay in your room, to shield yourself from the unfamiliar. But if you can, take small steps. Join a group chat, sit in the lounge, or just go out to the garden and watch life happen. Little by little, connections will come, sometimes from where you least expect. Fifth, understand that moving into a nursing home isn't the end of the road. It's just a change of scenery. Life keeps going, in a different way, yes, but it goes on. There are new friends, new routines, new lessons, and even new versions of yourself to discover. Sixth, and maybe the most important, don't let other people's opinions define how you feel. There will always be critics, people who judge without knowing, people who carry outdated views about aging or needing help. But in the end, you're the one living your life, and you have every right to choose what's best for you, without guilt, without shame. I'm not here to convince you of anything, just to say it's from someone who's already crossed that bridge, that the path is possible. It's not perfect. It's not easy, but it is possible. And many times it's lighter and more beautiful than we ever imagined back when we were still on this side, full of fear and uncertainty. What I take with me from this experience. Looking back at everything I've lived through since the day I walked through the doors of the nursing home is, at the same time, an emotional and deeply reflective exercise. I knew I was starting a new chapter, but I never imagined how profound and transformative it would be. More than just a place, this home became a space of discovery about myself, about others, and about life itself. I've learned that aging isn't about losing who we were, but about gaining new perspectives. That vulnerability doesn't make us less. It simply makes us more human. And that even in hard moments, it's still possible to find beauty, friendship, and meaning. If I had to sum it all up in a few words, I'd say this experience has taught me the value of adaptability, patience, and affection. Not just the kind we receive, but also the kind we're able to give. I take with me the stories I've heard, the smiles I've shared, the moments of silence filled with presence. I carry the pride of having faced my fears and taken that first step. And most of all, I carry the certainty that even if the road looks different from what I once imagined, it can still be full of life and dignity. For anyone watching who still feels that tightness in their chest, just thinking about the possibility of moving into a nursing home, all I can say is, don't be afraid of the unknown. Fear is natural, but the courage to move forward can lead to unexpected, beautiful paths. In the end, a nursing home isn't just a place where we live. It's a place where we truly live, with everything that comes with that: complexity, beauty, and realness.